I, said I. Do I look like a peddler boy? The Greenman grumbled.
Oh, finally.
Taking out his pipe on the heel of his palm. He made the pipe disappear somewhere inside his cloak or his coat. Rand was not sure where he'd gone or how. I'm a Greenman, not a newsmonger. And I'm disappointed never knowing anything about eyes but eyes. What's thicker, that word? What's a war? Began eagerly, only to be cut off by Master Randall. In wars, boy, fools kill other fools for foolish causes. That's enough for anyone to know. I am here for my art. Suddenly,
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
You laugh. You're a tall one. Not with your full growth on you yet. Is that color either, are we, Jeff? The point is, you're an axe handle across the shoulders and as tall as an Aida mountain. What's your name, lad? There, and the scepter too, and opened the gateway right there before the dais.
Hell yeah.
A slash of light that rotated, widening to give a view of an empty, dark-paneled chamber more than 600 miles from Camelin. In the Sun Palace, the royal palace of Kyria. Set aside for his use this way, the room held no furnishings, but dark blue floor tiles and wood-paneled walls glistened from polishing. Windowless, the room was bright anyway. 8 gilded stand lamps burned.
Well, it didn't go too bad. I can't complain too much.
The oil-fed lamps. He paused to buckle on his sword, while Suolin and Urien opened the door to the corridor and led veiled maidens in red shields through before him. In this case, he thought their caution ridiculous.
How was your day?
Outside, the only way to reach the room was already crowded with 30 or so of Far Aldazar Din, brothers of the Eagle, and nearly 24 of Berlane's Mayenners, in red-painted breastplates and rimmed pot-like helmets that came down to the nape of the neck and back. If there was one place anywhere that Rand knew he needed no maidens, it was Kyria. More so even than Tyr. A brother of the Eagle was already loping down the hallway by the time Rand appeared, and the Mayenner awkwardly clutching spear and short sword as he followed the taller
That normal, boring.
In fact, a small army trailed after
Sometimes that's good.
Servants in various liveries, a tyrant defender of the stone in burnished breastplate and black and gold coat, a Kyrian soldier with the front of his head shaved, his breastplate much more battered than the tyrant's, 2 young Aiel women in dark heavy skirts and loose white blouses, whom Rand thought he recognized as apprentices to wise ones. News of his arrival would spread quickly. It always did. At least Alana was far away. Varen too, but most of all, Alana. He still felt her, even at this distance. Just a vague impression that she was somewhere to the west. Like the feel of a hand, just a hair from touching the back of his neck. Was there any way to get free of her? He seized Saidin again for a moment, but that still made no difference. You'll never escape the traps you spin yourself. Luz Theron's murmur sounded confused. Only a greater power can break a power, and then you're trapped again. Trapped forever, so you cannot die. Rand shivered. Sometimes it really did seem that voice was speaking to him. If only it would make sense once in a while, having it in his head would be easier. I see you, Karakan, one of the brothers of the Eagle said. His gray eyes were on a level with Rand's. I am Corman of the Mosada Goshin. May you find shades this day. Rand had no chance to answer properly before the pink-cheeked Mayenner officer was shouldering in. Well, not exactly shouldering. He was too slender to shoulder aside a man a head taller and half again as wide, especially an Aiel, though maybe young enough to think he could. Yet he did squeeze himself in front of Rand next to Corman, tucking under his arm a crimson helmet with a single slender red plume. My Lord Dragon, I'm Javier Nurella, Lord Lieutenant in the Winged Guards. There were wings worked on the sides of his helmet. In service to Berlain Sir Payandrag Perun, first of Mayenne, and at your service also. Bowman gave him an amused, sideways look. I see you, Javier Nurella, Rand said gravely, and the boy blinked. Boy, come to think on it, you might be no younger than Rand. That was a shock. If you and Corman will show me. Suddenly he realized Avienda was gone. He nearly broke his back trying to avoid the woman. The first time in weeks he agreed to let her near him, she slipped away as soon as his head turned. Take me to Berlane and Ruark, he ordered gruffly. If they're not together, take me to whoever is closer and find the other. Running to the wise ones, no doubt, to report on what he had been up to. He would leave the woman behind here. What you want is what you cannot have. What you cannot have is what you want. Luz Theron laughed maniacally. It did not bother Rand as much as it once had. Not quite as much. What had to be endured could be. Discussing who was nearest, Corman and Havian left their men behind, but they still made quite a procession, with all the maidens in red shields following close, crowding the square-vaulted hallway. The corridor had a dark, heavy feel, despite lighted stand lamps. There was very little color anywhere, except in occasional tapestries.
It was okay,
yes. Tried to make up for it by having everything rigidly arranged, whether embroidered flowers or birds, deer or leopards in a hunt, or nobles in battle. For the Carianan servants who scurried out of the way, livery usually meant colored stripes on the cuffs and a house badge embroidered on the breast. Sometimes a collar or sleeves in house colors, very seldom an entire coat or dress. Only upper servants would show more color. Carianan liked order and disliked flamboyance. An occasional niche held a golden bowl or a seafolk vase, but stark and worked with straight lines, trying to disguise their curves if they had any. Whenever the hall gave way to a square-columned colonnade, if there was a garden below, the walks made a precise grid, every flower bed the same size, shrubs and small trees rigidly pruned and spaced. Had the drought and heat allowed any flowers, he was sure they too would have bloomed in straight lines. Rand wished Dylan could see those bowls and vases. The Shido had carried away whatever they could lift, all the way across Kyrian, and burned what they could when they could not carry it. But such behavior violated Giotto. The Aiel who followed Rand and had saved the city had taken, but by their rules, when they took a place in battle, they were allowed a fifth of what it held, and not a spoon more. Vale had agreed reluctantly to forego even that in Andor, but Rand thought no one without a list would believe anything had been taken here at all. For all their discussion, Corman and Havian failed to find either Ruark or Berlane before they were found themselves instead. The two came to meet Rand alone in one of the colonnades, without entourage, which only made him feel as though he was leading a parade himself. Ruark, in his cotton sore, gray streaking his dark red hair, towered over Berlane. A pale, beautiful young woman in a blue and white dress, cut low enough to make Rand clear his throat when she curtsied. Shufa looped loosely around his neck, Ruark carried no weapon but a heavy Aiel knife. She wore the diadem of the first, a golden hawk in flight, in shining black hair that made waves to bare shoulders. Perhaps it was just as well Avienda had gone. Sometimes she had a violent way toward women she even thought were putting themselves forward with him. Suddenly he realized that Luz Theron was humming tunelessly. Something about it seemed troubling, but what? Humming. Like a man admiring a pretty woman who was not aware of him. Stop that, Rand shouted inside his head. Stop looking through my eyes. No telling whether he heard. Was there someone there to hear? But the humming stopped. Havian went to one knee, but Verlaine gestured him to rise almost absently. I trust all is well with my Lord Dragon and with Andor. She had the sort of voice that made a man listen. And with your friends, Matt Coffin and Aaron Ibarra as well. All is well, he told her. She always asked after Matt and Perrin. However often he told her one was on his way to Tyr and the other he had not seen since before going to the Waste. And with you? Verlaine glanced at Ruark as they fell in on either side of Rand, proceeding into the next stretch of corridor. As well as can be expected, my Lord Dragon. It is well, Randolph Thor, Ruark said. There was not much expression on his face, but then there seldom was. Rand knew both understood why he had put Berlin in charge here. Cold reasons. The first ruler to offer him alliance freely, he could trust her because she needed him, now more than ever since that alliance, to keep Tyr from Mayenne's throat. The High Lords had always tried to treat Mayenne like a province. Besides, a foreigner from a small nation hundreds of leagues south, she had no reason to favor one faction over another in Cairhien. She had no hope of seizing power. And she knew the running of a country. Hard reasons. Given how Aiel felt about Cairhienin and Cairhienin about Aiel, putting Ruark in charge would have led to bloodshed. Cairhien had had enough of that. The arrangement seemed to be working out well. As with Samaradrid and Wyraman and Tyr, the Cairhienin accepted a Mayenner as governor as much because she was not Aiel as because Rand appointed her. Berelain did know what she was doing, and she at least listened to advice offered by Ruark, speaking for the clan chiefs remaining in Cairhien. No doubt she had to deal with the wise ones as well. They would give up meddling, which they did not see as such, the day after Aes Sedai did. But she had not mentioned them so far. And Egwene, Rand said. Is she any better? Berelain's lips compressed slightly. She did not like Egwene, but then Egwene did not like her. No reason for it, that he knew, but there it was. Ruark spread his hands. So far as Amis tells me, as well as being a wise one, Amis was his wife. One of his wives. He had two. One of the odder Aiel customs, among many Rand found odd. She says Egwene yet needs rest, light exercise, plenty of food and fresh air. I think she takes walks in the cool of the day. Berelain gave him a wry look. The faint sheen of perspiration on her face did not detract from her beauty, but of course Ruark was not sweating at all. I would like to see her, if the wise ones permit, Rand added. The wise ones were as jealous of their prerogatives as any Aes Sedai he had ever met, making sure of them with sept chiefs, clan chiefs, and perhaps most of all with the Karakai. But first a noise had been catching the edge of hearing as they approached another place where one wall of the corridor was replaced by balustraded columns. The clatter of practice swords. He glanced down in passing. At least that was his intention. What he saw in the stone-paved courtyard below stilled his tongue and stopped his feet. Under the eye of a stiff-backed Cairhienin, in a plain gray coat, a dozen sweat-drenched women flailed away in pairs, some wearing riding dresses with divided skirts, some men's coats and breeches. Most were awkward in the forms, if vigorous, while others flowed from stance to stance smoothly, yet swung the bundled lath blades hesitantly. All wore grim determination like a cloak, though grimness was likely to break into rueful laughter when one realized she had made a mistake. The stiff-backed fellow clapped his hands, and the panting women leaned on their practice swords, some working arms clearly unused to this. From beyond Rand's sight, servants darted out, bowing and curtsying right and left as they proffered trays with pitchers and cups. But if they were servants, their livery was odd for Cairhien. They wore white. Dresses or coats and breeches, all pure white. What is that? He asked. Ruark made a disgusted sound. Some of the Cairhienin women are quite impressed with the maidens, Berelain said, smiling. They want to be maidens. Only of the sword, I suppose, not the spear. Sualin stiffened indignantly, and Hanthok flashed among the maidens. The gesture seemed outraged. These are daughters of noble houses, Berelain went on. I let them stay here because their parents would not allow this. There are nearly a dozen schools in the city now that will teach the sword to women, but many need to sneak away to attend. It is not only women, of course. The younger Carianan in general seem very impressed with Yair. They are adopting Giotto.
They are mangling it, Ruark growled. Many ask about our ways, and who would not teach one who would learn what is proper, even a tree killer.
He looked ready to spit.
But they take what they are told and change it.
Not change, really, Verlaine protested. Only adapt, I think. Ruark's eyebrows rose a fraction, and she sighed. Avian's face was a picture of affront, seeing his ruler challenged. Neither Ruark nor Verlaine noticed. They were intent on Rand. He had the feeling this was an argument the pair had had often.
They change it, Ruark repeated deliberately. Those fools down there in white claim to be Gaishain. Gaishain!
The other Aielman muttered. Antok flickered among the maidens again. Avian began to look a trifle uneasy.
What battle or raid were they taken in? What toll have they incurred? You confirm my ban on fighting in the city, Verlaine Perron. Yet they fight duels wherever they think they'll not be found, and the loser puts on white. If one strikes another while both are armed, the one struck pleads for a duel, and if it is refused, puts on white. What has that to do with honor or obligation? They change everything and do things to make a Sharaman blush. It should be stopped, Randall Thor.
Verlaine's jaw firmed stubbornly, her hands tightening to fists on her skirts. Young men always fight. Her tone was condescending enough that you might almost have forgotten she was young herself. But since they began this, not one has died in a duel. Not one. That alone is worth letting them go on. Besides which, I have faced down fathers and mothers, some powerful, who wanted their daughters sent home. I will not deny those young women what I promised them.
Keep them, if you wish. Let them learn the sword, if they wish. But let them stop claiming to follow Giotto. Let there be an end to them putting on white and claiming to be Gaishain. What they do offends.
His chill blue eyes were fixed on Verlaine, but her large dark eyes remained steady on Rand. He hesitated only a moment. He thought he understood what drove the younger Carianan to Giotto. Twice conquered by Aiel in 20-odd years, they had to wonder whether the secret lay there. Or maybe they thought their defeats just showed that the Aiel way was better. Clearly the Aiel were upset by what they saw as a mockery of their beliefs, but in truth, some of the ways Aiel became Gaishain seemed no less peculiar. For instance, speaking to a man of his father-in-law or to a woman of her mother-in-law, second father and second mother in the Aiel way, was considered hostile enough to justify drawing weapons unless they had mentioned them first. If the offended party instead touched you after you spoke, under Giotto it was the same as touching an armed enemy without harming him. That gained much G and incurred much toll, but the one touched could demand to be made Gaishain to lessen the other's honor and their own obligation. By Giotto, a proper demand to be made Gaishain had to be honored, so a man or woman could end up Gaishain for mentioning somebody's mother-in-law. Hardly less foolish than what these Carianan were doing. Really, it came down to one thing, though. He had put Verlaine in charge. He had to support her. It was as simple as that. Carianan offend you by being Carianan, Ruark. Leave them be. Who knows? Maybe they will eventually learn enough that you won't have to hate them anymore. Ruark grunted sourly, and Verlaine smiled. To Rand's surprise, for one moment she seemed about to put her tongue out at the Aielman. Only his imagination, of course. She was only a few years older than himself, but she had been ruling Mayenne while he was still guarding sheep in the two rivers. Sending Corman and Javier back to their guard, Rand moved on, with Ruark and Verlaine to either side, and the rest following close. A parade. All it needed was drums and trumpets. The clatter of practice swords started up again behind him. Another change, however small. Even Moiraine, who had long studied the prophecies of the dragon, had not known whether his breaking the world again meant he would bring on a new age. But he was certainly bringing changes one way and another. As many by accident, it seemed, as on purpose. When they reached the door of the study Berlin and Ruark shared, rising suns decorated the long panels of dark polished wood, indicating some royal use once. Brand stopped, turning to Sulin and Urian. If he could not dispense with all these guards here, there was nowhere he could. I mean to return to Camelin an hour or so after sunrise tomorrow. Until then, visit the tents, see your friends, and try not to start any blood feuds. If you insist, 2 of you can hang about to protect me from mice. I don't think anything larger will jump out at me here. Urian grinned slightly and nodded, though he did gesture about head high to a Karianan and murmur, "The mice can be big here." For an instant, Rand thought Sulin meant to argue. Her flat stare lasted only a moment, though, before she nodded. Still tight-mouthed, however. Doubtless,
Hell
the
yeah,
argument
SK.
was full once there were
You have
only
a good
maidens
one.
to hear. A large room, the study presented sharp contrasts, even at his second sight of it. On the high worked plaster ceiling, straight lines and sharp angles made elaborately repeating patterns. And around the walls, as well as on a wide fireplace faced with deep blue marble. A massive table stood in the middle of the floor, covered with papers and maps, making a boundary of sorts. The 2 tall, narrow windows to one side of the fireplace held clay pots on deep stools, filled with small plants that showed a few tiny red and white blossoms. On that side of the table, a long wall hanging showed ships at sea and men hauling nets filled with oilfish, the source of Mayem's wealth. An embroidery hoop with needle and red thread dangling from a piece of half-finished work sat on a high-backed chair wide enough for Berlin to curl up in if she wished. There was a single carpet on the floor, in flower-like patterns of gold and red and blue, and a small table beside the chair held a silver wine pitcher and goblets on a silver tray, as well as a slim book bound in red with a gold-worked piece of leather marking Berlin's place. The floor on the other side of the table was layered in brightly colored rugs with tasseled cushions of red and blue and green scattered about. A tobacco pouch, a short-stemmed pipe, and a pair of tongs sat beside a covered brass bowl atop a small brass-bound chest, while a slightly larger chest, strapped with iron, held an ivory carving of a gawky animal Rand doubted really existed. 24 books of all sizes, from small enough to fit in a coat pocket to large enough that even Ruark must need both hands to pick them up, made a neat row across the floor along the wall. Aiel made everything in the waste that they needed except books. Peddlers had made fortunes among Aiel, hauling nothing but books. "Now," Rand said when the door was closed, leaving him alone with Ruark and Berlin. "How are things really?" "As I said," Berlin replied, "as well as can be expected. There is more talk of Caroline Damodred and Toram Rioton in the streets, but most people are too tired to want another war for a time. It is said 10,000 Andaman soldiers have joined them." Ruark began thumbing his pipe full. "Rumor always multiplies by 10, when not 20. Yet it is troubling if true. The scouts say their numbers are not large, but left to grow, they could be more than an annoyance. The yellow fly is almost too small to see, but if you leave its egg in your skin, you will lose an arm or leg before it hatches, if it does not kill you." Grant grunted noncommittally. Darlin's rebellion in Tyr was not the only one he had to face. House Rioton and House Damodred, the last 2 to hold the Sun Throne, had been bitter rivals before Rand had appeared, and likely would be again if he disappeared. Now they had put rivalry aside, on the surface at least. What went on below the surface with Karianan could be something else entirely, and like Darlin, meant to gather strength somewhere Toram and Caroline thought safe. In their case, the foothills of the spine of the world, as far from the city as they could be and remain in the country. They had gathered the same mix as Darlin, Nobles mainly of middle rank, displaced country folk, some outright mercenaries, and perhaps a few former brigands. Niall's hand might be there as well, as it was with Darlin. Those foothills were not nearly so impenetrable as Haddon Merk, but Rand held his hand. He had too many enemies in too many places. If he paused to swat Ruark's yellow fly here, he might find a leopard on his back somewhere else. He had it in mind to take the leopard first. If only he knew where all the other leopards were. What of the Shido? He asked, setting the dragon scepter down on a half-unrolled map. It showed the north of Kyrian and the mountains called Kinslayer's Dagger. The Shido might not be as big a leopard as Samael, but they were a sight bigger than High Lord Darlin or Lady Caroline. Berelaine handed him a goblet of wine, and he thanked her. Have the wise ones said anything at all about Savannah's intentions? He would have thought at least one or two could listen and look around just a little when she journeyed up to Kinslayer's Dagger. He would wager the Shido wise ones did when they came below the River Galen. He said neither thing, of course. The Shido might have abandoned Giotto, but Ruark had a traditional Aiel view of spying. The wise ones' views were another thing again, though exactly what could be hard to pin down. They say the Shido are building holds. Ruark paused, using a pair of tongs to hold a hot coal from the sand-filled brass bowl over his pipe. When he had it puffed alight, he went on. They do not think the Shido ever mean to return to the Threefold Land. Nor do I. Rand scrubbed his free hand through his hair. Caroline and Toram festering, and the Shido settling in this side of the dragon wall. A far more dangerous brew than Darlin. And Alana's unseen finger seemed on the point of touching him. Is there any other good news? There is fighting in Shamara, Ruark said around his pipe stem. Where? Rand asked. Shamara, or Shara. They give many names for their land. Kodansing, Tomaka, Kigali, others. Any could be true, or none. They lie without thought, those people. Unwind every bolt of silk you trade for, or find that only the outside is silk. And if the next time in the trade hold you happen to find the man who traded with you, he will deny seeing you before or coming to trade before. If you press it, the others kill him to appease you, then say only he could do anything concerning the silk, and try to trade you water as wine. Why is fighting in Shara good news? Rand asked softly. He did not really want to hear the answer. Berelaine was listening with interest. No one except the Aiel and the sea folk knew much more of the closed lands beyond the waste than that ivory and silk came from there. That and the tales and the travels of Jay and Farstrider, which were probably too fanciful to be true. But come to think of it, Rand did remember the line being mentioned, and the different names. Except the examples Farstrider had given matched none of Ruark's, as far as he could recall. There is never fighting in Shara, Randolph thought. It is said the Trolloc Wars infested them. Trollocs had entered the Aiel Waste too. Since then, the Trolloc name for the Aiel Waste was the Dying Ground. But if there has been one battle since, no word of it has come to the trade holds. Not much word of anything outside the hold walls does come inside. They say their land has always been one, not many, as here. Always at peace. When you came from Ruidian as the Karakarn, word of you spread, and of your title among the wetlanders here, the Dragon Reborn. Word traveled to the trade holds along the Great Rift and the Cliffs of Dawn. Ruark's eyes were calm and steady. This did not trouble him. Now word comes back across the Threefold Land. There is fighting in Shara, and Shara men in the trade holds ask when the Dragon Reborn will break the world. Suddenly the wine tasted sour, another place like Tarabun and Aradaman, torn just by hearing of him. How far did the ripples spread? Were there wars he would never hear of, in lands he would never hear of because of him?
Death rides on my shoulder, Lews Theron muttered. Death walks in my footsteps. I am death. Shuddering, Rand set his goblet on the table. How much did the prophecies demand in all those tantalizing hints and grandly roundabout verses? Was he supposed to add Shara, or whatever it was really called, Kyrian and the rest? The entire world? How, when he could not even hold Tyr or Kyrian completely? It would take more than one man's lifetime. Andor. If he was meant to rip every other land apart, rip the whole world, he would hold Andor safe for Lane. Somehow. Shara, or whatever it's called, is a long way from here. One step at a time. And Samael is the first step. Samael, Ruark agreed. Berlane shivered and emptied her goblet. For a time they talked of the Aiel, who were still moving south. Rand intended the hammer being made in Tyr to be clearly big enough to smash anything Samael could put in its way. Ruark seemed content. It was Berlane who complained that more needed to be kept in Kyrian. Until Ruark shushed her. She muttered something about him being too stubborn for his own good, but she went on to the efforts to resettle farmers on the land. She said by next year, there would be no need for grain from Tyr. If the drought ever broke. If it did not, Tyr would not be supplying grain to itself, much less anywhere else. The first tendrils of trade were beginning to reappear. Merchants had begun coming in from Andor and Tyr and Murundi, down from the borderlands. A seafolk ship at
Battery low. Battery 10%.
So far from the sea, but welcome. Berlane's face took on an intensity, and her voice a brisk tone as she moved around the table to take up this sheaf of papers or that, discussing what Kyrian needed to buy and what it could afford to buy, what it had to sell now, and what it would have in 6 months, in a year. Depending on the weather, of course. She brushed by that as if it was of no matter, though giving Rand a level look that said he was the dragon reborn, and if there was any way to stop the heat, he should find it. Rand had seen her meltingly seductive. He had seen her frightened, defiant, wrapped in arrogance. Right. But never like this. She seemed a different woman altogether. Ruark, seated on one of his cushions, puffing on his pipe, appeared amused as he watched her. This school of yours might do some good, she said, frowning at a long sheet covered in a precise hand, if they would stop thinking of new things long enough to make what they have already thought of. She tapped her lips with a finger, peering at nothing thoughtfully. You say give them what gold they ask, but if you would let me hold back, unless they actually... Jelani put her plump face in at the door. Aiel seemed not to understand, knocking, and said, Mangan is here to speak with Ruark and you, Randall Thor. Tell him I'll be happy to talk with him later. Rand got that far before Ruark broke in quietly. You should speak with him now, Randall Thor. The clan chief's face looked grave. Berling had replaced the long paper on the table and was studying the floor. Very well, Rand said slowly. Jelani's head vanished, and Mangan came in. Taller than Rand, he had been one of those who crossed the Dragon Wall in search of he who comes with the dawn. One of the handful who took the Stone of Tyr. 6 days ago, I killed a man, he began without preamble, a tree killer. And I must know if I have told to you, Randall Thor. To me, Rand said. You can defend yourself, Mangan. Like you know that. For a moment, he was silent, meeting gray eyes that were sober, but certainly not afraid. Curious, maybe. Ruark's face told him nothing. Berlane was still not meeting his gaze. He did attack you, didn't he? Mangan shook his head slightly. I saw that he deserved to die, so I killed him. He said it conversationally. He saw the drains needed cleaning, so he cleaned them. But you have said we cannot kill the Oathbreakers except in battle, or if they attack us. Do I have toe toward you now? Rand remembered what he had said. Him will I hang. His chest felt tight. Why did he deserve to die? He wore what he had no right to, Mangan replied. Wore what? What did he wear, Mangan? Ruark answered, touching his left forearm. This. He meant the dragon coiled around his arm. Clan chiefs did not display them often, or even speak of them. Almost everything about the markings were shrouded in mystery, and the chiefs were content to leave it so. It was a thing of needles and inks, of course. A tattoo. He was pretending to be a clan chief? Grant realized he was searching for an excuse. Him will I hang. Mangan had been one of the first to follow him. No, Mangan said. He was drinking and showing off what he should not have. I see your eyes, Randall Thor. He grinned suddenly. It is a puzzle. I was right to kill him, but now I have told to you. You were wrong to kill him. You know the penalty for murder. A rope around the neck, as these wetlanders use. Mangan nodded thoughtfully. Tell me where and when. I will be there. May you find water and shade today, Randall Thor. May you find water and shade, Mangan, Rand told him sadly. I suppose, Verlaine said when the door closed behind Mangan, that he really will walk to his own hanging of his own accord. Oh, don't look at me that way, Ruark. I don't mean to impugn him, or Aiel honor. 6 days, Rand growled, rounding on her. You knew why he was here, both of you. 6 days ago, and you left it to me. Murder is murder, Verlaine. She drew herself up regally, but she sounded defensive. I am not used to men coming to me and saying they have just committed murder. Bloody Giotto. Bloody Aielman and their bloody honor. The curses sounded odd coming from her mouth. You have no cause to be angry with her, Randall Thor, Ruark put in. Mangan's toll is to you, not to her, or to me. His toll was to the man he murdered, Rand said coldly. Ruark looked shocked. The next time somebody commits murder, don't wait for me. You follow the law. That way, perhaps he would not have to pass sentence again on a man he knew and liked. He would if he had to. He knew that, and it saddened him. What had he become? The wheel of a man's life, Luz there murmured. No mercy, no pity. Chapter 18. A Taste of Solitude. Are there any more problems you want me to deal with? Rand's tone made it clear he meant problems they should have already solved. Ruark shook his head slightly. Verlaine's face reddened as well. Good. Set a date for Mangan's hanging. If it hurts too much, Luz Theron laughed in a hoarse whisper, make it hurt someone else instead. His responsibility, his duty. He stiffened his back to keep that mountain from crushing him. Hang him tomorrow. Tell him I said so. He paused, glaring, then realized he was waiting for Luz Theron's comment, not theirs. Waiting for a dead man's voice. A dead madman. I'm going to the school. Ruark pointed out that the wise ones were probably on their way from the tents, and Verlaine, that Tyrian and Kyrianan nobles alike would be clamoring to know where she was hiding Rand. But he told them to tell the truth, and tell a lot of them not to follow him. He would return when he returned. The pair looked as if they had swallowed sour plums, but he snatched up the dragon scepter and left. In the hallway, Jelani and a yellow-haired Redshield, not much older than she, came smoothly to their feet, glancing at one another hastily. Otherwise, the corridor was empty, except for a few scurrying servants. One of each. It figured, though Rand wondered whether Urian had to wrestle Sulin to make it so. Motioning them to follow, he went straight down to the nearest stable, where the stalls were the same green marble as the columns that held the high ceiling.
The head groom, a gnarled fellow with big ears, the rising son of Carian worked on his short leather vest, was so shocked by Rand appearing with only 2 Aiel for escort that he kept staring at the stable doors for more and bowed so often between stares that Rand wondered whether he would ever get a horse. But once the man shouted, "A horse for the Lord Dragon!" 6 stablemen leaped to prepare a tall, fiery-eyed bay gelding with a gold-fringed bridle and a gold-worked saddle atop a sky-blue saddlecloth fringed and embroidered with rising suns in gold. As quickly as they moved, the big-eared head groom was gone by the time Rand swung into the saddle. To hunt for the coterie of followers the Dragon Reborn must have, possibly. Or to tell someone Rand was leaving the palace practically alone. Carian was like that. The sleek bay wanted to frisk, but while still trying to settle his dancing, Rand trotted him out of the palace grounds, past startled Carian and guards. He was not worried about assassins laying in ambush from the big-eared man's warning. Anyone who ambushed him would find they had come to the shearing without clippers. Any delay, though, and likely he would have nobles crowding around so thickly he could not leave without them. It felt good to be alone for a change. He glanced at Jelani and the young Aielman trotting beside the bay. Dedrick, he thought. A Jaren Riff Kodara. Almost alone. He could feel Alana still, and Luz Theron moaned in the far distance over his dead Ilyena. He could never be entirely alone. Maybe never again. What he had of solitude felt good, though, after so long. Carian was a large city, its major streets wide enough to dwarf the people crowding them. Each street slashed arrow straight through hills, carved and stone terraced until they seemed man-made, beating every other street at a right angle. Throughout the city rose huge towers wrapped in wooden scaffolding that nearly hid elaborate square-arched buttresses, towers that seemed to touch the sky and meant to go higher. 20 years since the fabled topless towers of Carian, a wonder of the world, had burned like torches during the Aiel War, and their rebuilding was still not done. Making a way was not easy, but trotting did not last. Rand had grown accustomed to crowds opening before his usual escort, yet with hundreds of cotton-sore-clad Aiel just within his sight among the slow-flowing throng, it was not quite the same, not for only 2. Some of those Aiel recognized him, he thought, but they ignored him. Not about to cause embarrassment by calling attention when the Karn wore a sword, and, not as bad, but hardly to be applauded, rode a horse. To Aiel, shame and embarrassment were far worse than pain. Though, of course, Giotto had to complicate things with degrees Rand understood only in part. Avienda could explain it, certainly. She seemed to want him to become Aiel. Plenty of others jammed the streets, too. Carianen in their usual drab clothing, and also in the shabby bright colors of those who had lived in the foregate before it burned. Tyrans, a head taller in the crowd, if not as tall as the Aiel. Ox carts and horse-drawn wagons threaded through the throng, yielding way to closed lacquer carriages and sedan chairs, sometimes with a house banner. Hawkers cried wares from trays and peddlers from push carts. Musicians, tumblers, and jugglers performed on street corners. Both were changes. Once Carian had been quiet, subdued, except in the foregate. Some of that sobriety still held. The shops still had small signs displaying no goods outside. And if the former foregaters seemed raucous as ever, laughing loudly and shouting at one another, arguing right there in the street, the other Carianen still eyed them with prim distaste. No one but Aiel recognized the bareheaded horseman in the silver-worked blue coat, though occasionally someone glanced twice at his saddlecloth. The dragon scepter was not well known here yet. Nobody gave way. Rand felt torn between impatience and the pleasure of not being the focus of every eye. The school occupied a palace a mile from the Sun Palace, once the property of one Lord Barthanes, now dead and unlamented. A great heap of stone squares with sharply angular towers and severe balconies. The tall gates onto the main courtyard stood open, and when Rand rode in, he found a welcome. Idrian Tarson, who headed the school, stood on the broad steps at the far end of the courtyard. A stocky woman in a plain gray dress, straight-backed enough to seem a head taller than she was. She was not alone. Dozens and dozens of others crowded the stone steps, men and women in wool much more often than silk, frequently worn and seldom ornamented. Older folk mainly. Idrian was not the only one with more gray than black in her hair, or no black at all, or no hair at all, though here and there a younger face peered eagerly at Rand. Younger meaning 10 or 15 years older than he. They were the teachers, in a way, though this was not exactly a school. Pupils did come to learn, young men and women hung gaping out of every window around the courtyard now, but for the most part, Rand had wanted to gather knowledge in one place. Time and again he had heard how much had been lost in the War of the 100 Years and the Trolloc Wars. How much more must have vanished in the breaking of the world. If he was going to break the world again, he meant to create repositories where knowledge could be preserved. Another school had already started in Tyr, though just barely, and he had begun seeking a place in Camelin. Nothing ever goes as you expect, Luz Theron murmured. Expect nothing, and you will not be surprised. Expect nothing, hope for nothing. Nothing. Suppressing the voice, Rand dismounted. Idrian came to meet him with a curtsy. As usual, when she rose, it was something of a shock to realize yet again that she was barely as tall as his chest. Welcome to the school of Kyrian, my lord Draken. Her voice was surprisingly sweet and youthful, a startling contrast to her blunt face. He had heard it harden, though, with students and teachers. Idrian held a tight rein on the school. How many spies do you have in the Sun Palace? He asked mildly. She looked startled, perhaps that he would suggest such a thing, but more likely because the question was not proper manners in Kyrian. We have prepared a small display. Well, he had not really expected an answer. She eyed the two Aiel like a woman eyeing two large and muddy dogs of uncertain temperament, but contented herself with a sniff. If my lord Dragon will follow me. He followed, frowning. A display of what? The entry hall of the school was a vast chamber of polished dark gray columns and pale gray floor tiles, with a gray-veined marble balcony all the way around 3 spans up. Now it was largely filled with contraptions. The teachers crowding in behind him went running to them. Rand stared, suddenly remembering what Berlane had said about the school making things. But what? Idrian told him, after a fashion, leading him from one to the next, where men and women explained what they had created. He even understood some of it. An array of screens and scrapers and crocks full of linen scraps produced finer paper than anyone made now, or so its inventor said. A great hulking shape of levers and huge flat plates was a printing press, much better than those already in use, according to its maker. Dedrick showed considerable interest in that until Jelani apparently decided he should be watching for somebody trying to attack the Ka Karn. She trod hard on his foot, and he limped after Rand. There was a plow on wheels meant to turn 6 furrows at once. Rand could recognize that at least. He thought it might work. And another thing with shafts for horses that was meant to harvest hay in place of men with scythes. And a new sort of loom that was easier to operate, so the fellow who made it said. There were painted wooden models of viaducts to carry water to places where the wells were going dry, of new drains and sewers for Kyrian, even a tabletop exhibit with tiny figures of men in carts, cranes, and rollers meant to show how roads could be built and paved as well as they had in years long gone. Rand did not know whether any of it would work, but some looked worth trying. That plow, for instance, could be handy if Kyrian was ever to feed itself again. He would tell Idrian to build it. No, he would tell Berlane to tell her. Always follow lines of authority in public view, Lorraine had said, unless you mean to undercut someone and bring them down. Among the teachers he knew was Kin Tovir, a stocky lens maker who kept wiping his bald head with a striped handkerchief. Aside from looking glasses in various sizes, count the hairs in a man's nose at a mile, he said. That was how he talked. He had a lens as big across as his head, a sketch of a looking glass to hold it, and more like it, a thing 6 paces long, and a scheme for looking at the stars, of all things. Well, Ken always wanted to look at things far off. Adrian wore a look of quiet satisfaction while Rand studied Master Tavier's sketch. She was not much for anything but the practical. During the siege of Carian, she herself had built a huge crossbow, all levers and pulleys, that hurled a small spear a full mile hard enough to drive through a man. Had she her way, there would be no time wasted on anything not real and solid. Build it, Rand told Ken. Maybe it was of no real use, not like the plow, but he liked Tavier. Adrian sighed and shook her head. Tavier beamed. And I'm giving you a prize of 100 gold crowns. This looks interesting. That produced a buzz, and it was close whether Adrian's jaw or Tavier's dropped farther. Other things in the hall made Tavier seem as level-headed as the would-be road builder. The round-faced fellow who did something with cow dung that ended with a bluish flame burning at the end of a brass tube. Even he did not seem to know what it was for. The lanky young woman whose display was mainly a shell of paper moored by strings and kept aloft by the heat rising from a small fire in a brazier. She mumbled something about flying. He was sure that was what she said. And birds' wings being curved. She had sketches of birds, and of what seemed to be wooden birds. But she was so tongue-tied meeting the dragon reborn that he could not understand another word, and Adrian certainly could not explain what it was about. And then there was the balding man with an assemblage of brass tubes and cylinders, rods and wheels, all covering a heavy wooden table freshly gouged and scraped, some gouges nearly deep enough to pierce the tabletop. For some reason, half the man's face and one of his hands were swathed in bandages. As soon as Rand appeared in the entry hall, he had begun anxiously building a fire under one of the cylinders. When Rand and Adrian stopped in front of him, he moved a lever and smiled proudly. The contraption began to quiver, steam hissing out from 2 or 3 places. The hiss grew to a shriek, and the thing began trembling. It groaned ominously. The shriek became ear-piercing. It shook so hard the table moved. The balding man threw himself at the table, fumbling a plug loose on the largest cylinder. Steam rushed out in a cloud, and the thing went still. Sucking burned fingers, the man managed a weak grin. Very nice brasswork, Rand said before letting Adrian lead him away. What was that? He asked quietly when they were out of earshot. She shrugged. Mervyn will not tell anyone. Sometimes there are bangs in his rooms loud enough to make doors tremble. And he has scalded himself 6 times so far, but he claims it will bring a new age when he makes it work. She glanced at Rand uneasily. Mervyn is welcome to bring it if he can, he told her dryly. Maybe the thing was supposed to make music. All those shrieks. I don't see Herod. Did he forget to come down? Adrian sighed again. Herod Fell was an Andoran who somehow had ended up reading in the Royal Library here. A student of history and philosophy, he called himself, and hardly the sort to endear himself to her. My Lord Dragon, he never comes out of his study except to go to the library. Getting away required a small speech, delivered standing on a stool with the dragon scepter in the crook of his arm, telling them that their creations were wonderful. Some might be, for all he knew. Then he was able to slip off with Jelani and Dedrick, and Luce Theron and Alana. They left behind a pleased babble. He wondered whether any besides Adrian had ever thought of making a weapon. Herod Fell's study lay on an upper floor where the view was of nothing much but the dark tile roofs of the school, and one square-stepped tower that blocked off anything else. Herod claimed he never looked out of the windows anyway. You can wait out here, Rand said on reaching the narrow door. The room inside was narrow too, and was surprised when Jelani and Dedrick agreed right away. A number of small things suddenly came together. Jelani had not given his sword one disapproving look, something she made a point of, since he came out of the meeting with Ruark and Verily. Neither she nor Dedrick had so much as glanced at the horse in the stable, or made a disparaging remark about how his own legs should be good enough for him. Another thing she did regularly. As if for confirmation, as Rand turned to the door, Jelani briefly eyed Dedrick up and down. Briefly, but with decidedly open interest and a smile. Dedrick ignored her so intently he might as well have stared. That was the Aiel way, pretending not to understand until she made herself clearer. She would have done the same had he begun the looking. Enjoy yourselves, Rand said over his shoulder, producing 2 startled stares, and went inside. The small room was all books and scrolls and sheets of paper, or so it appeared. Crowded shelves walled the room to the ceiling, except for the doorway and 2 open windows. Books and papers covered the table that took up most of the floor, lay in a jumble on the extra chair, even here and there on the little remaining of the floor. Herod Fell himself was a stout man who looked as if he had forgotten to brush his thin gray hair this morning. The pipe clenched in his teeth was unlit, and pipe ash sprinkled the front of his rumpled brown coat. He blinked at Rand for a moment, then said, yes, of course. I was about to... He frowned at the book in his hands, then sat down behind the table and fingered through some loose sheets of paper in front of him, muttering quietly. Turning to the title page of the book, he scratched his head. Finally, he looked back at Rand and blinked in surprise again. Oh, yes. What was it you wanted to talk about? Rand cleared the second chair, putting the books and papers on the floor, dropped the dragon scepter on the pile, and sat down. He had tried talking with others here, philosophers and historians, learned women and scholars, and it was like trying to pin down an Aes Sedai. They were very certain of what they were certain of, and about the rest, they drowned you in words that could mean anything. They either grew angry when pressed, they seemed to think he was doubting their knowledge, apparently a deep sin, or they increased the torrent of words till he did not know what half of them meant. Or they became obsequious, trying to find out what he wanted to hear so they could tell it to him. Herod was different. One of the things that always seemed to slip his mind was that Rand was the dragon reborn, which suited Rand very well. What do you know about Aes Sedai and Warders, Herod? About the bond? Warders? Bond? As much as anybody not Aes Sedai, I suppose. Which isn't saying much, mind. Herod sucked at his pipe, not seeming to realize it had gone out. What did you want to know? Can it be broken? Broken? Oh, no. I don't think so. Unless you mean when the warder or the Aes Sedai dies. That breaks it, I think. I remember hearing something about the bond once, but I can't remember. Catching sight of a sheaf of notes on his table, Herod drew it to him with his fingertips and began reading, frowning and shaking his head. The notes looked to be in his own hand, but he did not seem to agree with them anymore. Rand sighed. He almost thought if he turned his head quickly enough, he would see Alana's hand poised over him. What about the question I posed you last time? Herod? Herod? The stout man's head jerked up. Oh, yes. Question. Last time. Tarmageddon. Well, I don't know what it will be like. Trollocs, I suppose. Dreadlords. Yes, Dreadlords. But I've been thinking, it can't be the last battle. I don't think it can. Maybe every age is a last battle, or most of them. Suddenly he frowned down his nose at the pipe in his teeth and began rummaging across the table. I have a tinderbox here somewhere. What do you mean it can't be the last battle? He tried to keep his voice smooth. Herod always came to the point. You just had to prod him toward it. What? Yes, exactly the point. It can't be the last battle. Even if the Dragon Reborn seals the Dark One's prison again, as well as the Creator made it. Which I don't think he can do. He leaned forward and lowered his voice conspiratorially. He isn't the Creator, you know. Whatever they say in the streets. Still, it has to be sealed up again by somebody. The wheel, you see. I don't see... Rand trailed off. Yes, you do. You'd make a good student. Snatching his pipe out, Herod drew a circle in the air with the stem. The wheel of time. Ages come and go and come again as the wheel turns. Oh, the catechism. Suddenly he stabbed a point on that imaginary wheel. Here, the Dark One's prison is whole. Here, they drilled a hole in it and sealed it up again. He moved a bit of the pipe along the arc he had drawn. Here we are. The seal's weakening. But that doesn't matter, of course. The pipe stem completed the circle. When the wheel turns back to here, back to where they drilled the hole in the first place, the Dark One's prison has to be whole again. Why? Maybe the next time they'll drill through the patch. Maybe that's how they could do it the last time. Drill into what the Creator made, Maybe they drilled the bore through a patch, and we just don't know. Herod shook his head. For a moment he stared at his pipe, once more realizing it was unlit. And Rand thought he might have to recall him again, but instead Herod blinked and went on. Someone had to make it sometime. For the first time, that is. Unless you think the Creator made the Dark One's prison with a hole and patch to begin. His eyebrows waggled at the suggestion. No, it was whole in the beginning, and I think it will be whole again when the Third Age comes once more. I wonder if they called it the Third Age. He hastily dipped a pen and scribbled a note in the margins of an open book. No matter now. I'm not saying the Dragon Reborn will be the one to make it whole. Not in this age, necessarily, anyway. But it must be so before the Third Age comes again, and enough time passed since it was made whole, an age at least, that no one remembers the Dark One or his prison. No one remembers. I wonder. He peered at his notes and scratched his head, then seemed startled to find he used the hand holding the pipe. There was a smudge of ink in his hair. Any age where seals weaken must remember the Dark One eventually, because they will have to face him and wall him up again. Sticking his pipe back between his teeth, he tried to make another note without dipping the pen. Unless the Dark One breaks free, Rand said quietly. To break the wheel of time and remake time and the world in his own image. There is that. Herod shrugged, frowning at the pen. Finally, he thought of the inkpot. I don't suppose there's much you or I can do about it. Why don't you come study here with me? I don't suppose Tom and Gaten will happen tomorrow. And it would be as good a use of your time as any reason you can think of to break the seals. Herod's eyebrows shot up. Break the seals? Break the seals? Why would anyone but a madman want to do that? Can they even be broken? I seem to remember reading somewhere they can't. But I don't recall now that it said why. What made you think a thing like that? I don't know, Rand sighed. In the back of his head, Lew Theron was chanting. Break the seals and end it. Let me die forever.
Fanning herself idly with a corner of her shawl, Egwene peered both ways down the crossing hallway, hoping she had not gotten lost again. She was very much afraid she had, and not pleased if it was so. The Sun Palace had miles of corridor, none much cooler than outside, and she had spent little time in them to learn her way. There were maidens everywhere in twos and threes, far more than Rand normally brought with him, certainly far more than usual when he was not there. They simply appeared to be strolling, but to her something about them seemed furtive. A number knew her by sight, and she might have expected a friendly word. The maidens especially seemed to have decided that being a pupil of the wise ones outweighed being Aes Sedai, as they thought she was, to the point that she was not Aes Sedai any longer. But when they saw her, they looked as startled as an Aiel was likely to look. Acknowledging nods came a beat late, and they hurried on. It was not behavior conducive to asking directions. Instead, she frowned at a sweaty-faced servant with thin blue and gold stripes, wondering whether he knew how to get where she wanted to go from here. The difficulty was she was not exactly sure where it was she did want to go. Unfortunately, the fellow was plainly on edge with so many Aiel about. Seeing an Aiel woman frowning at him, they never seemed to notice her dark eyes, which certainly no Aiel had, and his head probably full of tales about the maidens, he turned and ran as hard as he could. She sniffed irritably. She did not really need directions anyway. Sooner or later she had to come on something she recognized. Certainly no point in going back the way she had come, but which of the other three? Choosing one, she strode off firmly, and even some of the maidens stepped out of her way. In truth, she was feeling a bit grumpy. Seeing Avienda again after all this time would have been wonderful if the woman had not simply nodded to her coolly and ducked into a private conference in Amis's tent. Private indeed, Egwene learned when she tried to follow. You were not summoned, Amis had said sharply, while Avienda sat cross-legged on a cushion, staring dejectedly at the layered carpets in front of her. Go and take a walk, and eat something. A woman is not meant to look like a reed. Bear and Mylane had come hurrying, summoned by Guy Shine, but Egwene was excluded. It had helped a little, seeing a string of wise ones turned away too, though only a little. After all, she was Avienda's friend, and if she was in some sort of trouble, Egwene wanted to help. Why are you here? Sorilia's voice demanded behind her. Egwene was proud of herself. She turned calmly to face the wise one of Shenderhold. A Jaracharine, Cerilia had thin white hair and a face that was leathery skin pulled tight over her skull. She was all sinew and bone, and though she could channel, she had less strength in the power than most novices Egwene had met. In fact, in the tower, she certainly would never have gone beyond novice before being sent away. Of course, channeling did not really count for much among wise ones. Whatever the mysterious rules governing wise ones, when Cerilia was about, leadership always settled on her. Egwene thought it was pure strength of will. A good head taller than Egwene, as most Aiel women were, Cerilia stared at her with a green-eyed gaze that could knock a bull off its feet. That was a relief. It was Cerilia's normal way of looking at everyone. Had she a bone to pick, the walls would have been crumbling wherever she looked, and tapestries catching fire. Well, that was how it seemed, anyway. I've come to see Rand, Egwene said. Walking in from the tent seemed as good exercise as any. Certainly better than walking 5 or 6 times briskly around the city walls, the usual Aiel notion of light exercise. She hoped Cerilia did not ask why. She truly did not like lying to any of the wise ones. Cerilia stared at her a moment as if she had sniffed something hidden, then hitched her shawl up on narrow shoulders and said, He is not here. He has gone to his school. Verlaine Perrin suggests it would not be wise to follow him, and I agree. Keeping her face smooth was an effort for Egwene. That the wise ones would take to Verlaine had been the last thing she expected. They treated her as a woman of sense and respect, which made no sense at all to Egwene, and not because Rand had given her authority. They cared not a twig for any Wetlander authority. It seemed ridiculous. The Mayaner woman flaunted herself in scandalous clothes and flirted outrageously, when she did not do more than flirt, as Egwene darkly believed she did. Not at all the sort of woman for Amis to smile on like a favorite daughter, or Cerilia. Unbidden thoughts of Gawain floated up in her head. It had only been a dream, and his dream at that. Certainly nothing like what Verlaine did. When a young woman's cheeks redden for no apparent reason, Cerilia said, there is usually a man involved. What man has attracted your interest? Can we expect to see you lay a bridal wreath at his feet soon? I said I seldom marry, Egwene told her coolly. The leather-faced woman's snort sounded like cloth ripping. The maidens and the wise ones, indeed all the Aiel, might have decided she was not Aes Sedai so long as she studied with Amis and the others, but Cerilia took it further. She seemed to think Egwene had become Aiel, added to which there was nowhere Cerilia did not think she had a right to stick her finger. You will, girl. You are not one to become far Daraismai and think men are a sport like hunting, if that. Those hips were made for babies, and you will have them. Will you tell me where I can wait for Rand? Egwene asked, more faintly than she would have liked. Cerilia was not a dream walker, able to interpret dreams, and she certainly had none of the foretelling, but she could be so definite that what she said seemed inevitable. Gawain's babies. Right. How could she have Gawain's babies? In truth, Aes Sedai almost never married. Rare was the man who wanted to marry a woman who, with the power, could handle him like a child if she chose. This way, Cerelia said. Is it Sandwin, that strapping true blood I saw around Amis's tent yesterday? That scar makes the rest of his face more handsome. Cerelia continued to come up with names as she led Egwene through the palace, always watching from the corner of a shrewd eye for any reaction. She also did her best to list each man's charms, and since this included describing what he looked like without clothes, Aiel men and women shared the same sweat tents, she certainly got enough blushes. By the time they reached the rooms where Rand would be spending the night, Egwene was more than glad to offer hasty thanks and firmly shut the sitting room door on her. Luckily, the wise one must have had business of her own to see to, or she might well have pushed her way in. Drawing a deep breath, Egwene began smoothing her skirts and adjusting her shawl. They did not need it, but she felt as if she had been tumbled downhill. The woman more than liked to play matchmaker. She was capable of fashioning the bridal wreath for a woman, dragging her to lay it at the feet of the man Cerelia had chosen, and twisting his arm until he picked it up. Well, not exactly dragging and arm twisting, but it came to the same thing. Of course, Cerelia would not take it that far with her. The thought made her giggle. After all, Cerelia did not really think she had become Aiel. She knew Egwene was Aes Sedai, or thought she was anyway. No, of course there was no reason to worry over that. With her hands on the folded gray scarf that held her hair back, she froze at the sound of soft footsteps in the bedchamber. If Rand could leap about from Camelin to Tyrion, perhaps he had leaped straight to his bedchamber, and perhaps someone or something was waiting for him. She embraced Saidar and wove several nasty things ready to use. A Guy Shine woman came out, arms full of bundled sheets, and gave a start at the sight of her. Egwene released Saidar and hoped she was not blushing again. Niella looked enough like Avienda to startle at first glance in that deep-cowled white robe, until you realized you had to add 6 or 7 years to a face that was perhaps not quite so tanned, perhaps a little plumper. Avienda's sister had never been a maiden of the spear, a weaver instead. She had completed well over half her year and a day. Egwene offered no greeting. It would only embarrass Niella. Do you expect Rand soon? She asked. The Karakarn will come when he comes, Niella replied, eyes meekly downcast. That truly appeared odd. Avienda's face, even plumper, did not go well with meekness. It is for us to be ready when he comes. Niella, do you have any idea why Avienda would need to closet herself with Amis and Bear and Millane? It certainly had nothing to do with dream walking. Cerelia had as much ability there as Avienda. She is here? No, I know no reason. But Niella's blue-green eyes narrowed slightly as soon as she spoke. You do know something, Egwene insisted. She might as well take advantage of Guy Shine obedience. Tell me what it is, Niella. I know that Avienda will strike me till I cannot sit if the Karakarn finds me standing here with dirty bedding, Niella said ruefully. Egwene did not know whether Ji'ito was involved somehow, yet when they were together, Avienda held her sister twice as strictly to account as any other Gaishine. Niella's robe trailed across the patterned carpet as she glided hurriedly toward the door, but Egwene caught her sleeve. When your time is up, will you put off the white? It was not a proper question, and meekness vanished in pride enough for any maiden. To do otherwise mocks Ji'ito, Niella said stiffly. Abruptly, a slight smile flickered on her lips. Besides, my husband would come looking for me, and he would not be pleased. The mild mask returned. Her eyes turned down. May I go now? If Avienda is here, I would not meet her. Can I avoid it? And she will come to these chambers. Egwene let her go. She'd had no right to ask anyway. Speaking of a Gaishine's life before the white or after was shaming. She felt a little ashamed herself, though of course she did not really try to follow Gepetto, only enough to be polite. Alone, she settled into a severely carved and gilded armchair, finding it strangely uncomfortable after so long sitting cross-legged on cushions or the ground. Tucking her legs beneath her, she wondered what Avienda was discussing with Amis and the other two. Rand, almost certainly. He always concerned the wise ones. They did not care about the wetlander prophecies of the dragon, but they knew the prophecy of Roidian back to front. When he destroyed the Aiel, as that prophecy said he would, a remnant of a remnant would be saved, and they intended to see that the remnant was as large as possible. That was why they made Avienda stay close to him, too close for decency. If she went into the bedchamber, she was sure she would find a pallet made up on the floor for Avienda. Still, Aiel saw such things differently. The wise ones meant Avienda to teach him Aiel ways and customs, to remind him that his blood was Aiel, if not his upbringing. Apparently the wise ones thought that needed every waking hour, and considering what they faced, she could not fault them entirely. Not entirely. Just the same, it was not decent, making a woman sleep in the same room with a man. Still, she could do nothing about Avienda's problem, especially when Avienda did not seem to see the problem. Leaning on her elbow, Egwene tried to think of how she was going to approach Rand. Her mind went round and round, but she had not settled on anything by the time he entered, murmuring something to two Aiel in the hallway before shutting the door. Egwene bounded to her feet. Rand, you have to help me with the wise ones. They'll listen to you, she burst out before she could stop herself. That was not what she had intended at all. It is good to see you again, too, he said, smiling. He was carrying that ancient Shan spear, carved with dragons since she saw it last. She wished she knew where he had gotten it from. Anything Shan Chan made her skin crawl. I am well, thank you, Egwene. And you? You look to be yourself again, full of ginger as ever. He looked so tired and hard, hard enough to make that smile appear odd. He seemed harder every time she saw him. You needn't think you're amusing, she glowered. Best to go on as she had begun. Better than backing and filling, giving him more reason to grin. Will you help me? How? Making himself at home. Well, they were his rooms. He tossed the tasseled spearhead on a small table with leopard-carved legs and shed his sword belt and coat. Somehow he was not sweating any more than the Aiel did. The wise ones listen to me, but they only hear what they want to. I've come to recognize that flat-eyed look they get when they decide I'm talking nonsense, and instead of embarrassing me by saying so or arguing about it, they'll just ignore it. He pulled one of the gilded chairs around to face her and sprawled in it, booted feet stretched in front of him. He managed to do even that with an air of arrogance. He definitely had too many people bowing to him. You do talk nonsense sometimes, she muttered. For some reason, having no more time to think concentrated her thoughts. Adjusting her shawl carefully, she placed herself in front of him. I know that you would like to hear from Elaine again. Why did his face go all sad like that? And at the same time, winter cold. Likely because he had not heard from Elaine in so long. I doubt Shiriam's been giving the wise ones very many messages from her for you. None so far as she knew, though he had seldom been in Kyrian to receive any. I'm the one Elaine will trust with that sort of missive. I can bring them to you, if you convince Amis that I'm strong enough to return to my studies. She wished she had not faltered, but he already knew too much about dream walking, if not Telairan. Almost everything about dream walking but the name was a close secret among the wise ones, particularly those who could dream walk. She had no right to give away their secrets. Will you tell me where Elaine is? He might have been asking for a cup of tea. She hesitated, but the agreement between her, Nynaeve, and Elaine, right, how long ago had they made it? That agreement held. He was no longer the boy she had grown up with. He was a man full of himself, and whatever his tone, those steady eyes on her face demanded an answer. If Aes Sedai and Wise Ones struck sparks, Aes Sedai and he would strike a conflagration. There had to be a buffer between the two, and the only buffers available were the three of them. It had to be done, but she hoped they did not get burned up doing it. I can't tell you that, Ram. I have no right. It isn't mine to tell. And that was the truth, too. For that matter, it was not as if she could tell him where this Salidar was, beyond Altara, somewhere along the river Eldar. He leaned forward and whispered, I know she's with Aes Sedai. You told me those Aes Sedai support me, or might. Are they afraid of me? I will take oaths to stay away from them if they are. Egwene, I mean to give Elaine the Lion Throne and the Sun Throne. She has claim to both. Kyrian will accept her as quickly as Andor does. I need her, Egwene. Egwene opened her mouth and realized that she was about to tell him all she knew about Salidar. Barely in time, she clamped her teeth shut so hard her jaws ached and opened herself to Saidar. The sweet feel of life, so strong it overwhelmed everything else, seemed to help. Slowly the urge to talk began to ebb. He sat back with a sigh, and she stared at him wide-eyed. It was one thing to know he was the strongest Taviran since Arthur Hawkwing, but quite something else to become caught up in it herself. It was all she could do not to hug herself and shiver. You won't tell me, he said. Not a question. Briskly he rubbed his forearms through his shirt sleeves, reminding her that she held Saidar. Close like this, he would be feeling it as a faint tingle. Do you think I meant to force it out of you? He snapped, suddenly angry. Am I such a monster now that you need the power to protect yourself from me? I don't need anything to protect me from you, she said as calmly as she could. Her stomach was still turning over slowly. He was Ran. He was a man who could channel. A part of her wanted to gibber and wail. She was ashamed of it, but that did not make it go away. Putting away Saidar, she regretted a tinge of reluctance. Yet it did not matter. If it came to that sort of struggle, unless she managed to shield him, he would handle her as easily as if they arm wrestled. Rand, I am sorry I can't help you, but I cannot. Even so, I ask you again to help me. You know it would be helping yourself. His anger was swallowed by a maddening grin. It was frightening how quickly that could happen with him. A cat for a hat, or a hat for a cat, he quoted. For nothing, she finished laughing. She had heard Taran Ferry folk say this from the door. You put your cat in your hat and stuff it down your britches, Randall Thor. She managed not to slam the door on her way out, but it was a near thing. Striding away, she wondered what she was going to do. Somehow she had to convince the Wise Ones to let her back into Telaran Riod, legally, so to speak. Sooner or later he was going to encounter the Aes Sedai of Salidar, and it would help so much if she could talk to Elaine or Nynaeve again first. She was a little surprised that Salidar had not approached him already. What was holding Shiriam and the rest back? Nothing she could do about it, and they thought it better than she. One thing she was eager to tell Elaine. Rand needed her. He sounded as if he meant that more than anything he had ever said in his life. That should set to rest all her worries about whether he still loved her. No man could say he needed you that way unless he loved you.
For a few moments, Rand sat staring at the door after it closed behind Egwene. She had changed so much from the girl he grew up with. In those Aiel clothes, she managed a good imitation of a wise one, except for the height anyway. A short wise one with big dark eyes. But then Egwene always did everything with her whole heart. She had stayed as cool as any Aes Sedai, seizing Saidar when she thought he was threatening her. That was what he had to remember. Whatever clothes she wore, she wanted to be Aes Sedai, and she would keep Aes Sedai's secrets even after he made it clear that he needed Elaine to ensure peace in two nations. He had to think of her as Aes Sedai. It was saddening. Wearily, he got to his feet and donned his coat again. There were still the Carian and nobles to see, Colabert and Marangil, Dobrain and the rest. And the Tyrants, Mylon, and Daracombe, and that lot would twitch if he gave the Carianan a moment more than they got. And the wise ones would want their turn at him, and Timoin and the rest of the clan chiefs here he had not met with yet today. Why had he ever wanted to leave Camelin? Well, talking with Herod had been pleasant. The questions he brought up were not, but it was nice to talk to someone who never remembered he was the dragon reborn. And he had found a little time without a coterie of Aiel surrounding him. He was going to find more of that. He caught sight of himself in a gilt-framed mirror. At least you didn't let her see you were tired, he told his reflection. That had been one of Moraine's more succinct bits of advice. Never let them see you weaken. He just had to become used to thinking of Egwene as one of them.
Apparently squatting at her ease in the garden below Randall Thor's rooms, Suellen tossed a small knife into the dirt, seemingly amusing herself with a game of flip. A rock owl's cry from one of the windows brought her to her feet with an oath, slipping the knife behind her belt. Randall Thor had left his room. Keeping watch over him this way was not going to work. If she had Enila or Somara here, she would set them on him. Normally, she tried to protect him from that sort of nonsense as she would a first brother. Trotting to the nearest doorway, she joined 3 more maidens, none had come with her, and began to search the warren of corridors while trying to appear just to be walking. Whatever the Karakarn wanted, nothing must happen to the only son of a maiden ever to come back to them.
Chapter 19. Matters of Toe. Bran thought that he would sleep well that night. He was nearly tired enough to forget Alana's touch, and more important, Avienda was out in the tents with the wise ones, not undressing for bed with no regard for his presence, not disturbing his rest with the sound of her breathing. Something else made him talk, though. Dreams. He always warded his dreams to keep the Forsaken out, and the wise ones, but warding could not keep out what was already inside. Dreams came of huge white things like giant bird wings, without the bird, sailing across the sky. Of great cities of impossibly tall buildings, shining in the sun, with shapes like beetles and flattened water drops speeding along the streets. He had seen all that before in the huge Turangrial in Rudihan, where he had gained the dragons on his arms and knew them for images of the Age of Legends. But this time it was all different. Everything seemed twisted, the colors wrong, as though something had gone askew in his eyes. The show wings faltered and fell, each carrying hundreds to death. Buildings shattered like glass. Cities burned. The land heaved like storm-tossed seas. And time after time, he faced a beautiful golden-haired woman, watched love turn to terror on her face. Part of him knew her. Part of him wanted to save her from the Dark One, from any harm, from what he himself was about to do. So many parts of him, mind splintered and glittering shards, all screaming. He woke in darkness, sweating, shaking. Luz Theron's dreams. That had never happened before, not dreaming the man's dreams. He lay there the hours remaining until sunrise, staring at nothing, afraid to close his eyes. He held on to Saidin as if he could use it to fight the dead man, but Luz Theron remained silent. When light finally appeared at the windows, Gaishain slipped silently into the room with a cloth-covered silver tray. Seeing Rand awake, he did not speak, only bowed and left just as quietly. With the power in him, Rand smelled cool sweetberry tea and warm bread, butter and honey, the hot porridge Aiel ate mornings, all as if his nose were in the tray. Releasing the source, he dressed and buckled on his sword. He did not touch the cloth covering the food. He did not much feel like eating. Holding the dragon scepter in the crook of his elbow, he left his apartments. The maidens were back in the wide corridor with Suellen and Urian and his red shield, but not alone. People crowded the hallway shoulder to shoulder beyond
Hell
the
yeah.
guards,
Cheers,
and
fire.
some inside the ring. Avienda stood among a delegation of wise ones, Amis and Bear and Mullane, Soralia, of course, Chalin, a smokewater Miagoma with touches of gray in her dark red hair, and Adara, a Nedershianda who looked not much older than himself, though she already had an apparently unshakable calm in her blue eyes, with a straight-backed presence to match the others. Berylane was with them too, but not Ruar or any of the other clan chiefs. What he had had to say to them had been said, and Aiel did not draw things out. But then, why were the wise ones there? Or Berylane? The green and white dress she wore this morning showed a pleasant expanse of pale bosom. Then there were the Kyrianen, outside the ring of Aiel. Colaver, strikingly handsome in her middle years, dark hair, an elaborate tower of curls, and horizontal slashes coloring her gown from high gold-embroidered collar to below her knees, more slashes than anyone else present. Solid, square-faced Dobrain, the front of his mostly gray hair shaved soldier fashion, and his coat worn from the straps of a breastplate. Marangil, straight as a blade, white hair touching his shoulders. He had not shaved his forehead, and his dark silk coat, striped like Dobrain's, nearly to his knees, was fit for a ball. 24 or more clustered behind, mostly younger men and women, few wearing horizontal stripes even as low as the waist. Grace favor the Lord Dragon, they murmured, bowing hand to heart or curtsying, and grace honors us with the Lord Dragon's presence. The Tyrants had their contingent as well, high lords and ladies, without lesser nobles, in peaked velvet hats and silk coats with puffy satin-striped sleeves, in bright gowns with broad lace ruffs and close-fitting caps of pearls or gems, making their respects with, "The light illumine the Lord Dragon." Mylon stood foremost, of course, lean and hard and expressionless, with his gray pointed beard. Close beside him, Theonda's stern expression and iron eyes somehow did not diminish her beauty, while willowy Anayella's simpers lessened hers. There were certainly no smiles of any sort on the faces of Marakan, a blue-eyed rarity among Tyrants, or Baldguayam, or Aracom, who looked twice as slender alongside Guayam's solid width, if just as steely. They, and Mylon, had been thick with Hearn and Simon. Rand had not mentioned those two yesterday, or their treason, but he was sure it was known here, and equally sure his silence was given meaning according to each man's own mind. They had grown used to such since coming to Carrion. This morning they watched Rand as if he might suddenly produce orders for their arrest. In truth, nearly everyone was watching someone. A good many eyed the Aiel nervously, often hiding anger with varying success. Others watched Berylane almost as closely. He was surprised to see that even the men, even the Tyrants, had more thought than lechery on their faces. Most watched him, of course. He was who he was and what he was. Gulliver's cool gaze shifted between him and Avienda, where it heated. There was bad blood there, though Avienda seemed to have forgotten. Gulliver would certainly never forget the beating she had received from Avienda after being discovered in Rand's rooms, or forgive the fact that it was common knowledge now. Mylon and Marangil each made his awareness of the other plain by avoiding the other's eyes. Both wanted the throne of Kyrian, and both thought the other his chief rival. Dobrain watched Mylon and Marangil, though why was anyone's guess. Mullane studied Rand, while Soralia studied her, and Avienda frowned at the floor. One big-eyed young woman among the Carrianen wore her hair loose and cut off at the shoulder instead of piled in ornate curls, and a sword belted over a dark riding dress with only 6 slashes of color. Many of the others did not bother to hide disparaging smiles when they glanced at her. She hardly seemed to notice, alternating between staring at the maidens with stark admiration or at Rand with stark fear. He remembered her. Salanda, one of the stream of beautiful women Colaver had thought would tie the dragon regime to her schemes, until Rand convinced her it would not work. with Avienda's unasked help, unfortunately. He hoped Colbert feared him enough to forget revenge on Avienda, but he wished he could make Salanda believe she had nothing to fear. You cannot please everyone, Moraine had said. You cannot soothe everyone. A hard woman. To cap it all, the Aiel watched everyone except the wise ones, of course, and except Berylane for some reason. They always eyed Wetlanders suspiciously, yet she might as well have been another wise one. You all honor me. Rand hoped he did not sound too dry. Back to a parade. He wondered where Egwene was. Probably lolling in bed. Briefly he considered finding her and making one last effort to... No, if she would not tell him, he did not know how to make her. Too bad being Ta'Veren did not work when he most wanted it to. Unfortunately, I will not be able to talk with you more this morning. I am returning to Camelin. Andor was the problem he had to deal with now. Andor and Samael. Your orders are to be carried out, my Lord Dragon, Berylane said. This morning, so you may witness it. My orders? Mangan, she said. He was told this morning. Most of the wise ones had donned a flat expression, but Bear and Soralia both wore open disapproval. Surprisingly, it was directed at Berylane. I don't mean to be a witness to every murderer who's hung, Rand said coldly. In truth, he had forgotten, or rather shoved it out of his mind. Hanging a man you liked was not something anyone would want to remember. Ruark and the other chiefs had not even mentioned it when he spoke with them. Another truth was that he would not make this execution special. Aiel had to live by the law like anyone else. Carianan and Tyrants had to see that, and know that if he would not play favorites with the Aiel, he certainly would not with them. You lose everything and everybody, he thought, sickened. At least, he hoped he had thought it. Besides, he did not want to watch any hanging, much less Mangan's. Mylan certainly looked thoughtful, and sweat was beading on Aracom's forehead, though that might have been the heat. Colbert, face going pale, seemed to be seeing him for the first time ever. Berylane divided a rueful glance between Bear and Soralia, who nodded. Could they have told her he would answer as he had? It did not seem possible. The others' reactions varied from surprise to satisfaction. But he noted Salanda in particular. Wide-eyed, she forgot the maidens. If she had looked at Rand fearfully before, now she was terrified. Well, so be it. I will be leaving for Camelin immediately, Rand told them. A soft sound rippled among the Carianan and Tyrans, very much like sighs of relief. It was no surprise that they all accompanied him as far as the chamber set aside for his traveling. Except for Berylane, the maidens in red shields kept the Wetlanders back. They did not particularly like letting Carianan near him, and he was as glad they barred the Tyrants today. There were plenty of glares, but no one said anything, not to him. Not even Berylane, who followed right behind with the wise ones and Avienda, talking quietly, occasionally laughing softly. That made the hair on his neck stand. Berylane and Avienda talking together and laughing. At the square-carved door to the traveling chamber, he looked carefully above Berylane's head as she swept him a deep curtsy. I will tend Carian without fear or favor until you return, my Lord Dragon. Perhaps, despite Mangan, she really had come this morning just to say that and be heard by the other nobles. It brought an indulgent smile from Soralia for some reason. He needed to find out what was going on there. He was not going to have the wise ones interfering with Berlin. The rest of the wise ones had drawn Avienda aside. They seemed to be taking turns speaking to her, quite firmly, though he could not make out words. When you see Perrine Barra next, Berylane added, please give him my warmest wishes. And Matt Coffin also. We await the Lord Dragon's return eagerly, Colbert lied. keeping her face carefully neutral. Mylon glared at her for having managed to speak first, and made a flowery speech, saying no more really than she had, which Moringill, of course, had to top, for floweriness at least. Bianda and Anayela outdid both, adding enough compliments that he eyed Avienda anxiously, but the wise ones still had her occupied. The brain contented himself with "until my Lord Dragon's return," while Marakan, Guayam, and Aracom murmured something indistinct with wary eyes. It was a relief to duck inside, away from them. The surprise came when Mullane followed him ahead of Avienda. He raised a questioning eyebrow. "I must consult with Vale on business of the wise ones," she told him in a no-nonsense voice, then immediately shot a sharp look at Avienda, who had on such an innocent face that Rand knew she was hiding something. Avienda looked many things naturally, but never innocent. Never that innocent. "As you wish," he said. He suspected the wise ones had been waiting a chance to send her to Camelin. Who better to make sure Rand did not influence Vale the wrong way than Vale's wife? Like Ruark, the man had two, which Matt always said was either a dream or a nightmare, and he could not decide which. Avienda watched closely as he opened the gateway back to Camelin into the Grand Hall. She usually did, though she could not see his flows. Once she had made a gateway herself, but in a rare moment of panic, and she had never been able to remember how. Today, for some reason, the rotating slash of light apparently reminded her of what happened that time. Red suffused her tan cheeks, and she suddenly refused to look in his direction. With the power filling him, he smelled her. The herbal scent of her soap, a hint of sweet perfume he could not remember her wearing before. For once, truly eager to be rid of Saidin, he was the first one through into the empty throne room. Alana seemed to crash home in his head, her presence as palpable as if she had been right in front of him. She had been weeping, he thought, because he had gone away. Well, let her weep for that. Somehow he had to break free of her. His going first did not sit well with the maidens or Redshields, of course. Furion merely grunted and shook his head disapprovingly. A white-faced Sulin went up on her toes to put herself nose to nose with Rand. "The great and powerful Karakarn gave his honor to Padurai's Mai to carry," she all but hissed in a low whisper. "If the mighty Karakarn dies in ambush while the maidens protect him, Padurai's Mai has no honor left. If the all-conquering Karakarn does not care, perhaps Anila is right. Perhaps the omnipotent Karakarn is a willful boy who should be held by the hand lest he run over a cliff because he will not look." Rand's jaw tightened. In private, he gritted his teeth and put up with this, with less pointed than this usually, for the debt he owed the maidens. But not even Anila or Samara had ever openly berated him in public. Mullane was already halfway down the hall, skirts gathered up and almost trotting. Apparently, she could not wait to re-establish the wise one's influence with Vale. He could not tell whether Urian had heard, though the man seemed awfully intent on directing his veiled Aetham door as they searched through the columns with the maidens, something they had no needed direction to do. Avienda, on the other hand, arms folded beneath her breasts, wore such a mix of frown and approval that he had no doubts about her. "Yesterday went very well," he told Sulin firmly. "From now on, I think 2 guards will be more than sufficient." Her eyes almost bulged. She could not seem to find breath to speak. Now that he had taken away, it was time to give back, before she exploded like an illuminator's fireworks. "It's different when I go outside the palace, of course. The guard you have been giving me will do then, but here, or in the Sun Palace, or the Stone of Tyr, 2 are enough." He turned away, while her mouth still worked silently. Avienda fell in beside him as he walked around the dais holding the thrones to the small doors behind. He had come here instead of straight to his own rooms in hope that he could lose her. Even without Saidin, he could smell her, or maybe it was the memory. Either way, he wished his head were clogged with a cold. He liked the smell too much. Shawl wrapped around her tightly, Avienda stared straight ahead of her as if troubled, not noticing when he held the door into one of the lion-paneled dressing rooms for her, something that usually aroused at least a little ire, perhaps a tart question as to which of her arms was broken. When he asked what was the matter, she gave a start. Nothing. Sulin was right. But suddenly she gave a reluctant grin. Did you see her face? No one has set her down like that since never, I think. Not even Ruar. I'm a little surprised to find you on my side. She stared at him with those big eyes. He could spend all day just trying to decide whether they were blue or green. No, he had no right to think about her eyes. What had happened after she made that doorway, to run from him, made no difference. He especially had no right to think about that. You trouble me so, Randolph Thor, she said without a bit of heat. Why, sometimes I think the Creator made you just to trouble me. He wanted to tell her it was her own fault. More than once he had offered to send her back to the Wise Ones, though it would just mean them putting someone else in her place. But before he could open his mouth, Jelani and Laya caught up, followed almost immediately by 2 red shields. One a graying fellow with 3 times the scars Laya had on her face. Rand directed Jelani and the scarred man back to the throne room, which nearly precipitated an argument. Not from the red shield, who merely glanced at his fellow, shrugged and went. But Jelani drew herself up. Rand pointed to the door leading to the Grand Hall. The Kar Karn expects Father Mai to go where he commands. You may be a king to the Wetlanders, Randolph Thor, but not to our heel. A tough sullenness marred Jelani's dignity, reminding him how young she was. The maidens will never fail you in the dance of spears, but this is not the dance. Still she went, after a rapid exchange of hand talk with Laya. With Laya and the lean red shield, a yellow-haired man named Cassidy stood a good inch taller than Rand. Rand strode quickly through the palace to his rooms. And with Avienda, of course. If he thought those bulky skirts might make her fall behind, he was mistaken. Laya and Cassin remained in the hallway outside his sitting room, a large chamber with a marble frieze of lions below the high ceiling and tapestries of hunting scenes in misty mountains. But Avienda followed him inside. Shouldn't you be with Mullane? He demanded. Business of the Wise Ones and all that? No, she said curtly. Mullane would not be pleased if I interfered right now. But he should not be pleased that she was not going. Dropping the dragon scepter atop a table with gilded vine-carved legs, he undid his sword belt and added that. Did Amis and the others tell you where Elaine is? For a long moment, Avienda stood in the middle of the blue-tiled floor, looking at him, her expression unreadable. They do not know, she said finally. I asked. He had expected she would. She had not done it in months, but before coming to Camelin the first time with him, every second word out of her mouth had been a reminder that he belonged to Elaine. In her view, he did, and what had happened between them beyond that gateway she had made clearly did not alter the fact, and would not happen again, something else she had made quite clear. Exactly as he wanted it. He was worse than a pig to feel regret. Ignoring all the fine gilded chairs, she settled cross-legged on the floor, arranging her skirts gracefully. They did speak of you, though. Why does that not surprise me? He said dryly. And to his surprise, her cheeks reddened. Avienda was not a woman for blushes, and this made twice in one day. They have shared dreams, some of which concern you. She sounded slightly strangled until she paused to clear her throat, then fixed him with a steady, determined gaze. Mullane and Bear dreamed of you on a boat, she said, the word still awkward after all these months in the wetlands, with 3 women whose faces they could not see, and a scale tilting first one way, then the other. Elaine and Anise dreamed of a man standing by your side with a dagger to your throat, but you did not see him. Bear and Anise dreamed of you cutting the wetlands in two with a sword. For an instant, her eyes darted contemptuously to the scabbarded blade lying atop the dragon scepter. Contemptuously and a bit guiltily. She had given him that, once the property of Layman. Carefully wrapped in a blanket so she could not be said to have actually touched it. They cannot interpret the dreams, but they thought you should know. The first was opaque to him as to the wise ones. The second was obvious. A man he could not see with a dagger had to be a gray man. Their souls given up to the shadow, not merely pledged, but given away. They could slip past notice even when you looked right at them. And their only real purpose was assassination. Why had the wise ones not understood something so plain? As for the last, he feared that was plain as well. He already was cutting lands apart. Caravan and Aradaman were ruins. Rebellions in Tyr and Tyrian could become more than skulking talk at any time. And Ilion would certainly feel the weight of his sword. And that was aside from the prophet and the dragon sworn down in Altara and Mirandy. I don't see any mystery in two of those, Avienda. But when he explained, she gave him a doubtful look. Of course. If Wise One dreamwalkers could not interpret a dream, certainly no one else could. He grunted sourly and flung himself into a chair facing her. What else did they dream? There is one other I can tell you, though it may not concern you. Which meant there were some she would not tell, which made him wonder why the Wise Ones had discussed them with her, since she was not a dreamwalker. All three had this dream, which makes it especially significant. Rain, that word still came clumsily too, coming from the bowl. There are snares and pitfalls around the bowl. If the right hand picks it up, they will find a treasure perhaps as great as the bowl. If the wrong hands, the world is doomed. The key to finding the bowl is to find the one who is no longer. No longer what? This certainly sounded more important than the rest. You mean somebody who's dead? Avienda's dark reddish hair swung below her shoulders as she shook her head. They know no more than I said. To his surprise, she rose smoothly with those automatic adjustments to her clothes that women always made. Do you... He coughed deliberately. Do you have to go? He had been about to say. Like he wanted her to go. Every minute around her was torture. But then every minute away from her was torture too. Well, he could do what was right and what was good for him, and best for her. Do you want to go back to the Wise Ones, Avienda? To resume your studies? There really isn't any point to your staying longer. You've taught me so much I might as well have been raised, Aiel. Her sniff said volumes, but of course she did not leave it at that. You know less than a boy of 6. Why does a man listen to his second mother before his own mother, and a woman to her second father before her own? When can a woman marry a smith? If you take a silversmith guy shine, why must you let her work one day for herself for each she works for you? Why is the same not true of a weaver? He floundered for answers, short of admitting he did not know, but she suddenly fiddled with her shawl as if she had forgotten it. Sometimes Giotto makes for very great jokes. I would laugh my sides apart if I were not the butt of this one. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I will meet my toe. He thought she was talking to herself, but he answered, carefully. If you mean about Lanfear, it wasn't me who saved you. Moraine did. She died saving all of us. Layman's sword had rid her of her only other toe to him, though he had never been able to understand what that was. The only obligation she knew. He prayed she never learned of the other. She would see it as one, though certainly he did not. Avienda peered at him, head tilted and a slight smile flickering on her lips. She had regained a self-possession that would have done Soralia proud. Thank you, Randolphor. Bear says it is well to be reminded now and then that a man does not know everything. Be sure to let me know when you mean to go to sleep. I would not come late and wake you. Rand sat there staring at the door after she had gone. A Kyrianan playing the game of houses was usually easier to understand than any woman making no effort to be enigmatic at all. He suspected that what he felt for Avienda, whatever that was, tangled things up worse. What I love, I destroy, Luz Theron laughed. What I destroy, I love. Shut up, Rand thought furiously, and the child vanished. He did not know who he loved, but he knew who he was going to save. From whatever he could, but from him most of all.
In the hallway, Avienda sagged against the door, taking deep, calming breaths. Meant to be calming anyway. Her heart still tried to tear
Give me
through her
one second,
ribcage.
everyone.
Being near Randall Thor stretched her naked over hot coals, stretched her till she thought her bones would pop apart. He brought such shame to her as she had never thought she would know. A great joke, she had told him, and part of her did want to laugh. She had told toward him, but much more toward Elaine. All he had done was save her life. Lanfear would have killed her without him. Lanfear had wanted to kill her in particular, as painfully as possible. Somehow Lanfear had known. Beside what she had incurred toward Elaine, her tow toward Rand was a termite mound beside the spine of the world. Cassin, the cut of his coat, told her he was Goshian as well as Ethan Dorr. She did not recognize his set, merely glanced at her from where he squatted with his spears across his knees. He knew nothing, of course, but Leah smiled at her, entirely too encouraging for a woman she did not know, entirely too knowingly for anyone. Avienda was shocked to find herself thinking that Charine, as Leah's coat marked her, were often sneaking cats. She had never thought of any maiden as anything but Fardar Ismai. Randall Thor had unstrung her brain. Still her fingers flashed angrily. Why do you smile, girl? Have
There we go. Had to go and refresh my page. Get the book back on.
The fellow's livery coat fit him, and he was not young. I'm afraid I don't know your name. The kneeling man goggled. My name? Barry, my Lord Dragon. 22 years, my Lord Dragon, come winter night. My Lord Dragon, the Ogier? Rand had visited an Ogier steading twice, but he was not sure of the proper etiquette. Ogier had built most of the great cities, the oldest parts of them, and still came out of their steading occasionally to make repairs. Yet he doubted Barry would have been this excited for anyone else less than King or Aes Sedai. Maybe not for them. Rand stuffed pipe and tobacco pouch back into his pocket. Take me to them. Barry leapt to his feet, all but bouncing on his toes. Rand suspected he had made the right choice. The man showed no surprise that the Lord Dragon was going to the Ogier instead of having them brought to him. He left his sword and the scepter behind. Ogier would not be impressed by Aya and Cassin came, of course, and it was plain
Damn, that went too loud.
Barry would have run back as well, if not for the necessity of keeping his pace.
Battery low.
That's why you did that. Went off and went real loud and went off.
Bluetooth mode.
The Ogier waited in a courtyard with a fountain, a basin filled with lily pads and red and gold fish. A white-haired man in a long coat that flared above high boots with their tops turned down, and two women, one noticeably much younger than the other, their skirts embroidered in vines and leaves, the elders considerably more elaborate than the youngers. Golden goblets made for humans seemed tiny in their hands. Several trees retained some of their leaves, and the palace itself gave shade. The Ogier were not alone. When Rand appeared, Sulin and a good 3 dozen maidens were crowded around them, and Urian plus 50 or more Aielmen. The Aiel had the grace to fall silent when they saw Rand. The Ogier man said, Your name sings in my ears, Randall Thor, in a voice like rumbling thunder, and gravely made introductions. He was Hammon, son of Dal, son of Morel. The older woman was Covril, daughter of Ella, daughter of Sun, and the younger was Aerith, daughter of Iva, daughter of Alar. Rand remembered seeing Aerith once in Steading Tsofu,
Ozzy.
a hard 2-day ride from the city of Kyrian. He could not imagine what she was doing in Camelin. The Ogier made the Aiel seem small. They made the courtyard seem small. Hammon stood over half again as tall as Rand, and broad in proportion. Covril, less than a head, an Ogier head, shorter than that, and even Aerith topped Rand by nearly 1.5 feet. Yet that was the smallest difference between Ogier and humans. Hammon's eyes were as large and round as teacups, his broad nose nearly covered his face, and his ears stood up through his hair, tipped with white tufts. He wore long drooping white mustaches and a narrow beard beneath his chin, and his eyebrows hung down to his cheeks. Rand could not have said precisely how Covril's and Aerith's faces differed, except for lacking beards and mustaches, of course, and their eyebrows were not quite so long or thick, but they seemed somehow more delicate. Though Covril's was quite stern at the moment, familiar too for some reason, and Aerith appeared worried, her ears sagging. If you will forgive me a moment, Rand told them. Sulin did not let him get another word out. We came to talk with the Tree Brothers, Randall Thor, she said firmly. You must know the Aiel have long been water friends to the Tree Brothers. We go to trade in their steading often.
That is quite true,
Hammon murmured. For an Ogier, it was a murmur, an avalanche somewhere out of sight. I'm sure the others did come to talk, Rand told Sulin. He could pick out the members of her guard this morning by eye, every last one of them. Jelani blushed a deep red. On the other hand, aside from Urian, no more than 3 or 4 of the morning's red shields were there. I would not like to think I need to ask Anila and Samara to take you in charge. Ulin's tanned face darkened with indignation, making the scar she had taken following him stand out more. I would talk with them alone. Alone, he emphasized, eyeing Laya and Cassin. Unless you think I need protection from them. If anything, that made her more offended, and she gathered up the maidens with quick flashes of hand talk in what for anyone but an Aiel would surely have been called a huff. Some of the Aiel men were chuckling as they left. Rand supposed he had made a joke of some kind.
Leave him alone.
As they went, Hammond stroked his long beard.
Humans have not always thought us so safe, you know.
His musing sounded like a huge bumblebee.
It is in the old records, very old. Only fragments, really, but dating from just after. Elder Harmon,
Covriel said politely.
if we may stick to the matter at hand.
Thought my speaker was going to fall.
This bumblebee rumbled at a higher pitch. Elder Hammond. Where had Rand heard that before? Each steading had its council of elders. Hammond sighed deeply.
Very well, Covriel. But you are showing unseemly haste. You barely gave us time to wash before coming here. I vow you've begun to leap about like...
Those big eyes flickered toward Rand, and he covered a cough with a hand the size of a large ham. Gear considered humans hasty, always trying to do now what could not possibly matter until tomorrow. Or until next year. Ogier took a very long view. They also thought it insulting to remind humans of how they leaped about.
This has been a most exacting journey outside,
Hammond went on, explaining to Rand.
Not the least of it discovering that the Shaidu Aiel had received. Most extraordinary, that. And that you were actually there. But then you left before we could speak with you. And I cannot help feeling we have been impetuous. No. No, you speak, Covriel. It is for you I left my studies and my teaching to go running across the world. My classes will be in riot by now.
And almost grinned. The way Ogier normally did things, Hammond's classes would take half a year